Today, I'm going to share 3 stories that each have a very iconic, disturbing photograph that is tethered to that story. And at the end of each of these stories, I'll show you that photo. And some of these photos are truly astounding. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to host the like button at your house for a big dinner party. But when they show up, don't let them inside. Instead, simply tar and feather them. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the morning of October 21st, 1990, a 30-year-old man named Lee Hunsho and 3 of his friends hiked up Bilu Mountain, which is located in northern Taiwan. Now, by this point, the group had already been hiking for several hours, and so they were quite tired. I mean, Lee's legs absolutely burned, but Lee and the others kept on pushing until they reached the top of this rocky ridge. They all stopped and were able to catch their breath for a minute. So Lee was a bank manager, but he was also a very outdoorsy person, and he'd been wanting to do this hike up Bilu Mountain for a long time because it was sort of like a rite of passage for hikers in Taiwan. It took an average of almost 8 hours to get to the top and back down again, and the terrain could be really rough. As a result, it was considered one of the most challenging hikes in all of Taiwan. But despite that, it was also a major tourist destination that was usually really busy, with lots of people attempting to do this hike. But on this particular day, for whatever reason, the friends had not seen anybody else on this trail. No one. And I mean, the weather was good. It was a weekend. I mean, there was really no good reason for nobody to be here. But they had the mountain to themselves. So Lee and his friends, they stood on this rocky ridge and caught their breath. They had some water. They had a couple of snacks. And then it was onward because they were not at the summit yet. I mean, this was a beautiful lookout point they were at, but they still had some pretty difficult climbing ahead. And so on they went, very excitedly. They're making their way towards the top. This is something they were all really excited about. And eventually they reached this section of the mountain that was sort of famous amongst tourists because it was a really, really steep section where the only way to get up was actually to climb a rope. There was a rope anchored into the mountain where, hikers had to grab the rope and walk and pull themselves up this section. It was like this kind of cool part that made you feel really rugged. And so when the men got to the spot, they all wanted to make sure there was a picture of them navigating this particular terrain. And so one by one, each of the men got on the rope and sort of paused at some point and turned around and made sure to get a cool picture of themselves making this really difficult section of the climb. And then once they had all taken their picture, they actually went the rest of the way up the rope and continued all the way up to the summit. And once they were on the summit, the friends actually didn't spend a whole lot of time there. I mean, remember, it takes almost 8 hours to do this entire round trip. And so you're sort of fighting against the darkness. You want to get back down before the sun goes down. And so they were up there long enough to get a couple of pictures and, again, to take stock of the fact that basically no one is here. In fact, literally nobody is here but them. It just seems sort of surreal. This is such a beautiful place, such a popular place. Why is nobody here? But didn't matter. They got their pictures, they got their beautiful scenery, they had some more water and snacks, and then they began making their descent. Now, on the way up, the friends had all been together. There was no separation. They were all, one by one, navigating each part of the terrain and making their way up together. But on the return trip, they got pretty separated, in part because Lee was really dragging behind. He was just so tired from the ascent that he sort of told the others, like, hey, go ahead, like you can walk ahead of me. We all know where we're going. We're going down and we'll meet at the car, so just go on ahead. And so Lee's friends had done just that. They had sort of taken off and gotten a bit of a lead on Lee. And so after a couple of hours of the group sort of broken up, making their way down the mountain, the friends in the front, who had left Lee behind effectively, they stopped at a certain point and they realized like they were really huffing it down the mountain, moving really quickly. And they thought, you know what? Lee was really tired up there. Maybe we ought to just sit here and wait for a minute and let him catch up, and then we'll we'll make the final stretch together. And so the friends, they stop. And again, they're sort of looking around thinking how weird it is that nobody else is here but them. Like still, no one's come up the mountain, no one's come down the mountain. It's just them. It's very odd. They're sitting there waiting and they're looking back up the trail, expecting Lee to show up anytime. But he doesn't. And so eventually one of the friends says, you know what, you guys stay here. I'm gonna go back up the mountain a little ways and just see if I can catch Lee and just walk with him back down. I'm sure he's just exhausted and I'll help him sort of finish up the hike here. And so this one friend, he begins going back up the trail. And for quite a while, he's basically hiking back up the mountain. And the whole time he's expecting he's gonna run into Lee. He has to. I mean, there were other trails that spidered off on the way down, so it was possible to take a wrong turn and sort of accidentally go down the wrong path, but for the most part, it was pretty linear. But as he's going up, he has not found Lee, and after a while, he's been hiking for like an hour back up the mountain and still no Lee. And he thinks, you know what, I can't do this, it's getting dark out. I have to go back and catch up with the other friends and just go down to the car because at this point, it seems pretty likely that Lee must have gotten turned around and he must have taken one of those other pathways. And now he's probably ahead of me. He's probably down at the car by this point. And so this friend who had done the rescue mission turned around, went back down, linked up with the other friends that were still sitting there waiting for him. Together, they walked all the way down the trail and they got to the car. And when they got there, they're expecting to see Lee, but he wasn't there. And by now, the sun had basically set. And so the friends realized that okay, like we have a real problem here. I mean, clearly Lee didn't just get lost. He's still in the mountain somewhere. And like, what are we gonna do? It's about to be nighttime. Like, we can't go up there looking for him. And so they hopped in their car and they drove to the nearest police station to tell them to go look for Lee. And sure enough, there would be this huge search that was launched for Lee. And over the coming week, I mean, there were all these people out scouring the mountain looking for Lee, but they couldn't find him. And after a week of searching, the police had to call it off. And so Lee's friends and family were left with this huge question mark. Like, where did he go? What happened to him? I mean, the not knowing was in some ways worse than having found out he had died or something. And so there's this horrible uncertainty. Nobody really knows how to react to this. Do you grieve his loss now, or do you hold out hope that maybe he's still alive? Well, the friends and family kind of did the latter. They kind of held out hope that, maybe he's out there somewhere. And weeks turned into months, and eventually 4 months went by. And it was at that point that other hikers who were making their way up the mountain, they went off the trail on purpose. They were sort of off the trail for a bit, and they came across Lee's body. Now, the immediate reaction was obviously devastation for Lee's family and friends, but at least it seemed like they were going to get closure about what actually happened to Lee. However, when police began to investigate what actually killed Lee and why, they ran into a lot of anomalies. Number one, they did an autopsy and they couldn't figure out what killed him. There was no clear cause of death. Number two, where he was found, he was just kind of sitting there, with his back against the mountain. His pack was right next to him. It almost seemed like he just sat down and then just died in place. But again, there's no clear cause of death. There was no obvious, trauma he sustained. It certainly didn't seem like he fell. He didn't appear to have any obvious injuries. He just stopped at some point on the mountain and died. And on top of that, remember, Lee is like a seasoned climber. He had supplies in his bag that could at least last him for some time. He had a flashlight, he had a compass. He knew where he needed to go, down the mountain to the car. Why is he stopping? Again, no injuries, no clear injuries. Why is he stopping right there until he dies? It just didn't add up. But then there was another very strange development that sort of took the story in a totally new direction. One of the friends who was with Lee on that doomed hike, the one who had the camera that took pictures of all of them climbing up that rope and took pictures up on the summit, he went and got his pictures developed shortly after Lee had been found dead. And when he went through the photos from their trip, he could not believe what he found. Here is the photo of Lee posing with that rope. And if you notice, at the top of this segment, there's a person clearly up there looking down at Lee and his friends. But remember, They didn't see anybody else on the mountain the entire time they were there. And they certainly did not see that appears to be a young girl in a red jacket, right at the top of the segment they were in when they were taking those photos. They didn't see her. They would have absolutely communicated with her, but they didn't see her. And so they have this photo of this girl in Lee's picture, but she wasn't in any of the other photos. She was just in Lee's. And making this even stranger is there was this myth about this mountain, that there were these spirits on this mountain that would sometimes target hikers and lead them astray away from their friends off the trail, where effectively they would die. And wouldn't you know it seemed an awful lot like Lee was led astray and just sort of sat down and died on the mountain shortly after that picture captured this girl in red looking down at him. BetterHelp is the paid partner of today's video. As an adult, I have found the holiday season can sometimes be sort of depressing. And I think the reason for that is nostalgia. I find myself looking back at my childhood when I had no responsibilities and I basically just got given presents and had wonderful food and family and friends around. And I look back at that and I think, that's what the holidays are about. Why can't I have that? Now I have bills to pay and I have a job and I have responsibilities. It doesn't feel magical. It feels stressful and kind of sad. But I'm here to tell you that there's a solution. And it's not to go back in time. It's instead to just be present. Be present in the moment. Appreciate what you have. Things have changed, no doubt, but that's okay. Change is okay. You just can't be stuck in the past. You need to be in the present. So if you want to slow down, reflect, and reset this December, BetterHelp makes it really easy to start talking with a therapist. BetterHelp accepts both HSA and FSA cards, making it even easier to prioritize your mental health. In 2024 alone, over 137,000 people used their HSA or FSA benefits for therapy through BetterHelp. So be sure to use yours before they expire. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/MrBallen to get 10% off your first month. On the morning of August 8th, 2024, a 48-year-old Russian woman named Lyudmila Lazarenko sat on the floor of a bungalow deep in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. The bungalow was small and mostly just for sleeping, but it was connected to a communal kitchen and dining space. Lyudmila sat right in the middle of the bungalow on the floor, with her eyes closed and her legs crossed, and she was trying to meditate, but the sounds of the birds and the insects outside in the rainforest, plus the sound of her friend, Ivan Kuzmin, who was moving around in the attached kitchen, were making it hard for her to concentrate. And so Lyudmila finally gave up on meditating for right now, and she opened her eyes and she looked out towards the kitchen and she saw her friend, Ivan, who was 38 years old and from Ukraine, and he was busy brewing some tea. So Lyudmila and Ivan genuinely were just platonic friends. In fact, Lyudmila, she was married and had 2 kids, but she was out here alone. She and Ivan were actually part of what was a retreat out in the Amazonian rainforest with other people from all over the world who would come out here to meditate in nature and do some soul searching and hopefully come back to their regular lives with some additional perspective. Now, Lyudmila and Ivan had been going to retreats like this for the better part of 2 years, and that was actually how the two had met each other. And so they were just friends. They had this similar interest in going to retreats like this one. But there was one aspect of these retreats that really is the thing that drew Lyudmila and Ivan out to the rainforest. It was not just to sit in nature and just hope for the best. They would go to these ayahuasca retreats, where basically they were led through this meditative process where they would drink this very special tea that would sort of affect you in different ways. And, some people believed it sort of led you on this spiritual journey where, it's just this very powerful, soul-searching event where you come out of this thing feeling like a different person. If you've had trauma in your life or you have, post-traumatic stress, or maybe you have trauma in your life that you're not even aware of, going through this style of retreat, these ayahuasca retreats, people have said has been very powerful and transformative. And Lyudmila, she lived a pretty typical life back home. She's a very busy mom and a wife, and she found doing these retreats really offered her a big reset. She felt like it was the one chance for her to kind of disconnect from responsibility, and just be at peace. And Ivan, for the most part, felt very much the same way. I mean, he came to these retreats for similar reasons for his own life. And so here they are, they're out in the rainforest, and they're brewing up some tea, some ayahuasca tea, and they're in this bungalow and they're getting ready to have this sort of meditative journey, but they were about to break a very important rule. So the man who ran this particular retreat out in this part of the rainforest, he made it explicitly clear to everybody who came out there that no matter how many times you've come to these retreats or similar retreats, you never, ever drink the ayahuasca without a shaman present, basically without somebody else there to sort of help guide you through this process. If you were to do it on your own, who knows what could happen? And so everybody knew you cannot do this on your own. But Ludmila and Ivan, they felt like, you know what, I get it. We're not supposed to do that, we know that, but we've done this so many times and we know what we're doing. So let's just brew up some ayahuasca of our own and we'll stay in our bungalow and we'll drink it ourselves. We'll have our own experience. Nobody will even know. And so that's what Ivan was doing in the kitchen. He was making ayahuasca tea. And when he was done, he grabbed 2 mugs of this tea. He walked back over to Ludmila, who was in the bungalow section. He sat down next to her. They drank their tea and they both laid down on the ground and closed their eyes. A couple of hours later, the director of this retreat, who at the time was directing some group meditation not very far away from the bungalow where Ivan and Ludmila were, he was doing this group meditation when he heard a loud scream, and it was coming from somewhere near the bungalows. And instinctively, he got up, he abandoned the group he was with, and he ran to the scream. And he saw one of his staff members. She was the one who screamed, and she was standing looking into the bungalow where Ivan and Ludmila were. And so the director rushes over and gets right next to this woman, and he looks into the bungalow, and immediately he knew 2 things. One, he knew for a fact these 2, Ivan and Ludmila, had broken the rule. They had taken ayahuasca without a shaman present. And 2, they had paid a horrible, horrible price. So ayahuasca is not just some herbal tea. It is a very powerful hallucinogen. And that's the whole point. People go out into the rainforest for these retreats and drink this hallucinogen in order to basically have perspective on their lives that you can only get by, introducing this chemical and causing yourself to hallucinate. People talk about almost seeing themselves from the outside looking in and like having this deeply spiritual event where you come out of your trip, that's what it's called, feeling like, oh my goodness, I know myself better now because of the hallucinations I just went through. But critically, the reason you have to have a shaman present in these retreats is really for safety. Because sometimes when you take ayahuasca, you have a bad trip where you have all these hallucinations, but they're of horrible, terrifying things, but you can't differentiate them from reality. And so you're living in a nightmare. And a lot of times these bad trips, it feels like something's gonna happen to you. You're gonna get hurt in some way, or somebody else is gonna get hurt unless you act. But again, you're sort of out of your mind. And so you have these shamans present to protect you from yourself. But Ivan and Ludmila didn't have a shaman present. And so when they entered their trip, Ludmila was having a good trip, Ivan was not. He had a horrible trip. And in his trip, he believed that Ludmila had become possessed by evil spirits, and he needed to save her soul. And how was he gonna save her? Well, he took a metal bottle and beat her savagely, and then he went and got a knife from the communal kitchen and he proceeded to dismember her. That staff member who walked over and screamed, they looked in and saw Ivan looking at them, smiling, totally insane looking, still high on ayahuasca, and there are pieces of Ludmila all over the bungalow. Here is a picture that was taken of Ivan very shortly after that staff member discovered this bloodbath inside of the bungalow. Ivan is literally sitting on the ground, feet away from pieces of Ludmila. He's just murdered her savagely, and he's still absolutely tripping on ayahuasca. He looks like an absolute madman. Ivan would come down from his ayahuasca trip, and when he did, he immediately confessed to what he had done, and he was arrested for murder, and he is currently serving time in prison in Peru. Around 4 p.m. on August 20th, 1975, an 18-year-old boy named Michael McQuilkin hiked up a massive granite rock called Morro Rock, which is in Sequoia National Park in California. Michael's 12-year-old brother Sean and his 15-year-old sister Mary were also on this hike with him, but currently they were lagging way behind, and he could just tell it was because they were tired. Now, the hike to the summit of Morro Rock was only a quarter of a mile, like this is a pretty short hike, but it was really steep. And Michael, despite only being 18, was sort of a pretty seasoned climber. I mean, he had just hiked 200 miles through the Sierra Nevada mountain range all by himself. And so for him, this terrain was no big deal, but he knows his siblings are not big mountaineers, nor are they pretending to be. And so he thought, okay, I'll wait, I'll let them catch up. But as Michael waited, he started to notice that the sky was getting pretty dark. Now, he had checked the weather before coming out here, and there was not supposed to be a storm, but it was sort of undeniable that something's happening. This is not normal. It's getting pretty dark and windy. But Michael told himself that, you know what? Maybe there's just a little pocket of weather and it'll pass. This can't be a big deal. And then eventually his siblings finally caught up to him. And then together, just a couple of minutes later, they were right at the summit. Now, by the time they were on the summit, they're looking out and the view is spectacular. But now it's becoming increasingly apparent to all three of them that this weather system, whatever's rolling in here, is pretty big and pretty bad. This is not some passing little thing. The sky is like pitch black at this point. But before they left, they just wanted to take a quick picture. And so because they didn't have a tripod or anything, they actually had Mary just take a picture of Michael and Sean. It was the best they were gonna do. They couldn't really get a group shot. And so Mary snaps a photo of the two brothers. And then after taking this photo, they put the camera away and they're about to begin their descent when suddenly, all around them, everything turns bright white and there's this loud cracking sound, and then Michael is thrown to the ground, and before he has any idea what's going on, he's looking over and he sees his brothers on the ground, his sisters on the ground, and in fact, he sees smoke coming off of Sean's back. And that's when he realized they had just been struck by lightning. Now, Michael didn't really know if he was badly hurt or not, but he was able to jump right to his feet and he felt like he was basically okay. And his sister also, she was able to stand up, and they're obviously both disoriented and shocked. But Sean, I mean, he's in a heap on the ground and is literally smoking. It seemed like he really took the brunt of this lightning strike. And so Michael and his sister, they scooped Sean up, and together they hustled down the mountain. They got in a car and they rushed to the hospital. And somewhat unbelievably, despite taking effectively a near direct hit from a lightning bolt, Sean survived. I mean, he was covered in burns, but he and Michael and Mary all lived through this strike. But the reason we know about this lightning strike is not just because they survived. That's great, but that's not why we still talk about it today. The reason we still talk about it today is because of that picture that Mary took of Michael and Sean standing on the summit of this mountain. If you look at this picture, you can see that the two brothers, their hair is sticking up in all directions. And they noticed at the time that their hair was standing up, but they didn't know why. They thought it was kind of funny. That's why they're smiling in the picture. But what they didn't realize they were capturing in this photo is the very scary phenomenon that occurs when you're basically right about to be struck by lightning. The air around you, especially if you're in a very exposed spot, like the summit of a mountain, gets electrically charged and your hair stands up right before you're hit by the bolt. And so now this picture is now used by the National Park Service to show people what to be aware of when you're out hiking on these mountains. If your hair starts to stand up, you better move. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And today, I'm gonna tell you 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to bring the like button's car in for a service. But make sure when you have it there, you ask them to replace the air in their tires with helium. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the evening of December 14th, 2024, a woman in her mid-30s named Priya got ready for bed inside of her home in Chehenkalo village, which is a rural community in central India. Priya put on her PJs, brushed her teeth, and then climbed into bed by herself. She was waiting for her husband, 35-year-old Anand Yadav, to finish his bath and then come in here and join her. And as Priya laid there, just waiting for her husband, she couldn't help but feel like their house was so quiet. And in many ways, the quiet of their house was this constant reminder of this really deep sadness in her life, which is, Priya really wanted a kid, but she and her husband had struggled to get pregnant. And now, they're in their mid-30s and it just seemed like time was running out. And, it's like all she wanted was a family and she didn't know if she would actually have one. Now, for Priya though, this was not some new revelation. Like this pain had been going on for years. And so like she did most nights as she laid in bed waiting for her husband, she just did her best, not to dwell on it and just think about the other things in her life that were going well, like, her relationship to her husband. They were very happy and a very healthy couple. And so she's sitting there and she's thinking about that and again, trying to be grateful when the door opens to the bathroom and Anand comes out, but he's not dressed for bed. He's wearing a bathrobe, like he hasn't gotten dressed yet. And he's acting kind of funny. And Priya, she's looking at her husband, trying to figure out like, what is he doing? Why isn't he dressed? What's going on here? When she suddenly realizes his face is like bright red. Clearly there is something wrong with her husband. And then before she can ask him what's going on, Anand just turns and runs out of their bedroom, just wearing his bathrobe. And so Priya, she gets out of bed and she chases after her husband, trying to make sense of what the heck is going on here. She gets outside and she sees her husband is now collapsed on the ground outside. And so Priya really does not know what's happening here. She has no sense of what could be wrong. And so she just runs over to her husband and she rolls him over and she's shaking him to like get him to talk to her. But all she sees is his face is still this beet red color and it's almost like he's passed out or something, like he's not responsive. And so really having no clue what else to do, she just rushed next door to her relative's house. She got some family members, they came outside and together they scooped up the non-responsive Anand, threw him in a vehicle and they rushed him to the hospital. And when they got to the hospital, Priya leapt out of the car, leaving Anand and her family behind, and she bolts inside. She tells the front desk attendant what's going on, that her husband, he's not breathing, he's unresponsive, he's in the car. And so right away, medical staff came charging out. They went and they got Anand, they brought him inside, and before long, Priya is running behind all the doctors and nurses that are rushing Anand on a gurney through the hospital to an exam room. They get in the exam room, and even though Priya, she's kind of off to the side, she can't really see what's going on, but she can see the doctor who is primarily trying to figure out what's wrong with Anand. And she sees at first he's kind of like doing a couple things to see if he can get Anand to start reacting to him. But pretty quickly, she sees this doctor just kind of sit back and there's this look of pity that comes over his face. And he turns and he looks over at Priya and he tells her that, unfortunately, your husband is dead. Now for Priya, this whole thing has happened so quickly that it's almost like she can't even begin to process it. And so instead of, becoming hysterical with grief, her first thought is, how could he have died? Anand was a healthy guy. He's, 35 years old. He's in the best shape of his life. He's a happy guy with a robust social life. Like there's no reason he should be dying right now. Like what in the world happened here? What killed him? Like that's her question to the doctor. But the doctor said, he's like, I don't know. The only way we're gonna be able to figure out what happened here is to do an autopsy because there's just nothing obvious. And so sure enough, a couple of days later, the hospital's pathologist was, inside of an exam room with Anand's body laying on a table right in front of him. And this pathologist had done countless autopsies. This was, very standard work for this doctor. And so the pathologist, they went into this autopsy really not having any idea what killed this guy, but in their head, they were thinking, okay, maybe it was a sudden heart attack because this sort of seems like that could be it. And so they made their first incision on Anand's chest, and the first place they went to look was Anand's heart. But after looking at Anand's heart, they determined that no, he did not go into cardiac arrest. He did not die from a heart attack. This death was not connected to his heart. And so the pathologist naturally moved from the heart to Anand's lungs, which is another area that, he believed could have something to do with this death. But after checking those out, it was clear the lungs did not have to do with Anand's death. And so after that, the pathologist wound up checking all of Anand's organs, trying to find any sign of what killed him, but there was nothing. There was no indication that this guy should have died. Now, the pathologist was a little bit surprised because they figured, by this point, they would have had the answer of what happened to him, but it's no matter. They had done many autopsies before where it required some, further looking to figure out what happened. And so they moved on and they made an incision in Anand's throat. And when they opened up Anand's throat, the pathologist just stepped back and gasped, because in their entire career, they had never, ever seen anything like this. It would turn out that Priya was not the only one who felt deep sadness around not having a family yet. Anand as well was just really heartbroken over the idea that, he was never going to become a father. And so, without telling his wife, Anand had gone out and sought out professional help for their fertility issues. However, the type of professional help that he sought was a little bit unorthodox. Instead of going to see a licensed doctor, Anand went to see what's called a tantric, which is basically a practitioner of occult magic. And this tantric gave Anand instructions for how to perform this ritual that supposedly guaranteed, if he did it correctly, that he would be able to have his child. Anand clearly believed this tantric, and so after being given the instructions, he went out and gathered the necessary resources, and he took them home. And then on the night that he died, while Priya was in bed waiting for him, and he was in the bathroom, taking his bath or whatever, well, at some point in the bathroom, Anand performed this fertility ritual, and it killed him. Anand, per the tantric's instructions, had taken a living baby chicken, a chick, and attempted to swallow it whole. Apparently that was all he needed to do in order to have a child, as he so desperately wanted. But when he swallowed this chick, it got stuck in his throat, and within minutes, he suffocated to death. And also, unfortunately, the chick died as well. One morning in late November of 1979, a 64-year-old man named John Perrin walked through a park near his home in East London, South Africa, which is a small coastal town. The park was basically a forested area that ran right along the coastline, so even though John was walking on a trail through all these trees, he could literally hear the ocean waves crashing down on the beach below. And being out here was actually a pretty big deal for John, because he didn't come to this park very often. In fact, he pretty much never left his house, because John was a total recluse. And, in addition to not leaving his house, he basically spoke to nobody. He didn't have friends, didn't have family. He basically had this one cousin he spoke to sometimes on the phone, but that was it. This guy was very isolated. But today, something in John had told him to go outside and go to this park and take a walk. It was just like this kind of weird intuition that he couldn't even explain. But he just hadn't questioned it, and here he was, doing what his gut was telling him to do. So now, he followed the trail through the woods and listened to the ocean down below, and he eventually went around this bend, and when he did, he saw there was somebody on the trail up ahead. It was this young man who John had never seen before, and this young man looked really anxious. He was sort of pacing back and forth on the trail, like he was trying to maybe build up the nerve to do something. At least that's what John's first impression was. Now, to John, this guy did not feel like a threat to him. It just seemed sort of odd what he was doing, and so John was curious, and so he continued walking down the trail closer to this guy to see what was happening here. Remember, John thinks he's here for some really divine reason in some ways. He doesn't really know what it is. He thinks his gut intuition has brought him here. Maybe it's this guy. And so he's walking down the trail, sizing up what he's doing. And as he gets closer to this man who's pacing back and forth, John realizes that the man is sort of pacing up to the edge of this cliff. Basically, again, this park sits right on the coastline, but the coastline is way down below. And John realizes this guy is pacing back and forth to the cliff and then going back over to the cliff and then back. And this is a massive drop off. This cliff is all the way down to the beach, easily a fatal fall if you were to fall off the cliff. And suddenly it clicks for John. This young man is contemplating taking his own life. He's working up the courage to jump off the cliff. At least that's what John is thinking. The young man is so locked in on what he's doing, he's barely even registering that John is here. He's still just pacing, building up the courage, again, it appeared, to jump off this cliff. And so John's standing there, not really sure what to do. And also there were these other people that were also on the trail that had sort of taken notice of the situation. And there was this crowd forming, sort of standing a little bit back of this young man, not wanting to unintentionally, startle him and get him to jump off the cliff. Everyone's just kind of standing there watching. But for John, as he's standing there, almost paralyzed, not knowing what to do, he's watching this guy go back and forth. And then it was like everything clicked. Suddenly, John understood why he was here. His gut instinct had brought him here to go up and interact with this young man. And so John broke from the crowd. He walked up to this young man who was still pacing back and forth, and he put his arm around the young man, and he looked at him and he said, "I'll show you how it's done." And then John walked to the edge of the cliff and jumped. And the young man was so shocked by this that he just stood there and he watched as John plummeted down to the beach below and smashed into the ground and died. And this young man, he's so horrified by this, so shocked, that he decided he wasn't going to jump after all. Seeing it happen, seeing John do the thing that this young man was there to do, to jump off this cliff, to take his own life, to see somebody else do it was so awful that he decided not to do it. And so as he's having this revelation, the young man also distinctly felt grateful to John, for doing what he did, because in watching what happened to him, it showed the young man that in fact, he did want to live. At 1 a.m. on March 3rd, 1944, a young train operator named MrBallen stood in the caboose car of a freight train that was slowly going up the side of a mountain in southern Italy. Michel's job was to operate the brakes for the back half of the train. And tonight, he had to be on high alert because they were traveling under really dangerous conditions. In fact, Michel was worried they might not even make it to the next stop. So first of all, it was raining and snowing outside, so the tracks were naturally very slippery, which meant it was going to be harder for the train to get the traction it needed to go up the mountain. Second, the train's engine wasn't working as well as normal. And that was in large part because the coal the train company had to use was this really cheap, crappy kind of coal. Because this is 1944, World War II is raging, and a coal shortage had been created as a result of that, because all the good coal was being shipped off to be used in the war. And so, this train company had the bad coal. And then finally, the train was just way too heavy. Even though it was only supposed to be carrying the small crew and the freight, the reality is there were over 500 stowaways on board weighing the train down. Again, this is World War II. There are all these people that are trying to flee war-torn parts of the world, and one of the ways they would do that is by stowing away on trains. And now Michel and the other crew, they were aware of these stowaways. It was not subtle. They're literally in the cars, they're on top of the cars, and they're just trying to make their way into Italy to get away from, war-torn parts of the world. And Michel and the other crew, they were supposed to call security and, tell these people to get off the train, but they didn't do that. They felt bad. And they sort of felt like, allowing these people to, make their escape was, a morally good thing to do. But tonight, between the horrible weather making the tracks slick and, the coal that was not very good and sort of made the engine not work very well, and all this additional weight from the stowaways, it just seemed to Michel like if there was ever going to be a time that this train could not make it up the mountain, it was going to be tonight. And so the reason he's on high alert is if the train reached a point where it could not go any higher for any of the reasons I've just told you, the train would start to backslide. And that's incredibly dangerous, and it would be on Michel and also the engineers at the front of the train to hit the brakes and stop the slide. And so Michel, he's on high alert, he's got the lever for the brakes, he's watching for any sign of the train slowing down, something like that. And they begin to make their ascent up this mountain up ahead. And at first, it's going relatively fine, but it was just very clear to Michel, who knew this train well, that it was struggling to get up the tracks. But he saw up ahead there was this tunnel they would have to pass through before they made the trip the rest of the way up and over the mountain. And Michel's thinking, great, the tunnel is going to provide us dry, clean tracks where the train, if we just get into that tunnel, we can sort of get some momentum, get through the tunnel and ride that momentum because we know the tracks are going to be good up and over the rest of the way. And so Michel he's anxiously watching as the train is sort of sputtering its way up towards this tunnel. He knows that's going to be the key. Just get to that tunnel and we'll be able to get over this mountain, no problem. And so up they go, inching their way, and he sees the front of the train goes into the tunnel, and right away he feels like the train's gaining a little bit of speed here as more and more of the train is getting onto those dry tracks in the tunnel, and they're moving right along, but then sort of inexplicably, the train begins to slow down as the train is, again, entering into this tunnel. Remember, it's late at night, he can't really see what's going on, he can just tell that there's the tunnel, the train's going in, but we're slowing down here. And in fact, by the time that the caboose, where Michel was about to enter into the train, the last car here, the train had finally slowed down so much that the train actually came to a stop with Michel and the caboose right outside the tunnel. So, 99% of the train is in the tunnel, Michel and the caboose are outside. The train is now fully stopped. Now, generally speaking, the conductor, who was situated in the very front car of the train, was overall in charge of the train. And so in any sort of emergency situation, it was often on the conductor to sort of make the call about what the crew was going to do in response. Now, the train was clearly not backsliding. There wasn't an active emergency here, but Michel knew that this is wrong. There really wasn't a clear reason they should be stopped here. If anything, again, this tunnel represented their best chance to move quickly and gain momentum and ride up and over this mountain. And so Michel does not know why they're stopped, but clearly there's some sort of issue. However, Michel knows from his training that what he needs to do is still be weary of the brake here, because for all he knows, maybe there is some issue with the train and it is backsliding, but it's just slow. And so he needs to be ready to hit the brakes. And so what Michel did is he held the brake and waited for a signal from the conductor. Basically, the conductor would blow a series of whistles that, Michel would be able to translate that would tell him what to do, whether it was, lock the brakes or come up and talk to me or any number of different things he might need to do in this situation. And so Michel, he's just sitting there waiting for the train whistle, but there's nothing. There's just quiet. There's no other sound except for the idling engine, towards the front of the train. And so Michel, he just started to have this bad feeling that this doesn't make sense. There's no good reason why we've stopped here. And so Michel, operating on gut instinct here, despite not getting any signal from the conductor, no whistles, no anything, he abandoned the caboose, he abandoned the brake station, and began walking from the caboose basically up the center of the train, going into the next car. And when he got into the next car, it's totally dark because it's 1 a.m. This car is the first car that he's walking into that's in the tunnel, so it's very dark. And he did have a flashlight, but he didn't want to shine it on the people who are sleeping in here because there's hundreds of stowaways. These people have had very bad luck. They just want to get out of the country. And so as quietly as he could, he's walking through the aisle of this next train car and, he doesn't notice anything. Everybody is asleep for the most part. And he's walking along, and as he gets to the next train car, he realizes he's starting to hear a new sound. And it's not coming from in the train. It's coming from somewhere outside in the tunnel. It's like this loud thumping sound. Something is hitting the rocks on the side of the tracks somewhere in the tunnel. And Michel, he doesn't know what it is. He still doesn't know what's going on. He hasn't discovered any sign of, what has actually happened here. And so he just keeps on walking. And as he goes into the next car, he continues to hear all these thumping sounds somewhere outside. And the train's still not moving. There's no whistles from the conductor. By the time he's about halfway down that next train car, he's now into the second car he's investigating. He realizes that in addition to the odd thumping sound and the lack of movement and lack of anything really going on in this tunnel, he also realizes that the car itself that he is in is very quiet. Remember, there's basically dozens of people in each of these cars kind of laying on each other, sleeping as they make their way into Italy. And so for the first time, Michel turned on his flashlight and he's aiming it at the ground right in front of him. And he turned and began to scan all the stowaways sleeping in this car. And what he saw was so horrifying, he dropped the flashlight, turned, and ran out of the tunnel. It would turn out Michel was right to be concerned that this train might not be able to make it up this mountain. By the time the train sputtered into that tunnel, despite the fact that yes, the conditions were much better in the tunnel for the train to maintain speed and momentum, despite that, the other factors were too much to overcome. The train was too heavy from all the stowaways, and the coal was quite bad, so the engine was not as powerful as it normally would be. And so even though the tracks were not slick, it was just too much. And so the train ground to a halt inside of the tunnel. And so what needed to happen as soon as the train came to a stop like that is the conductor and the crew at the front of the train, they needed to basically jumpstart the train. They needed to put as much coal as they could into the furnace to get this engine churning enough that it could pick up speed again and continue their journey. They basically needed to rev the engine, if you will, and really fire this engine up and get it going. But in order to do that, they had to put a huge amount of this coal into the furnace to make that jumpstart happen. Because again, this coal is not high quality. It doesn't burn as well, it's not as efficient. And so basically what could have been accomplished with 2 times the amount of coal, you needed like 10 times the amount of this bad coal to do the same thing. But one of the byproducts of burning this type of coal, really coal in general, but especially this cheap kind of coal, and especially this much of this cheap kind of coal, is it produces a ton of carbon monoxide. And that filled this tunnel. Michel was outside of the tunnel. His caboose was the one car that was not in the tunnel. But everybody else on this train was suddenly being exposed to a huge amount of poisonous, lethal gas. And it killed virtually everybody on this train very quickly. Those thumping sounds that Michel was hearing were the sounds of people's bodies after they had died rolling off the train and falling to the ground. When he walked through the train car and looked around, the reason it was so quiet is everybody in these train cars were dead. Out of the approximately 600 stowaways and crew who had been on board this train, 521 were found dead. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya. One September afternoon in Taiwan, a young man boarded a public bus for what he thought would be just an ordinary ride home. But it wasn't that. This ride would turn out to be the single most terrifying experience of this guy's life. And we don't just have to take his word for it, because this young man managed to capture a photo of the thing that was terrorizing him on this bus for hours. And so no matter what you think of the story, the picture is fascinating. So make sure you stick around till the end to see that photo. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, on garbage collection day, wake up really early, go to the Like Button's house and take their full trash cans away from the curb and put them back in their yard, wait for the garbage trucks to come by, and then after they're gone, wheel the Like Button's garbage bins back out to the curb. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the afternoon of September 4th, 2017, a young man named Zhu rushed through a bus station in southern Taiwan. Zhu's bus home to the capital city, Taipei, would be leaving any minute now, and because Zhu was running late, he knew the bus would be packed and he would get a terrible seat. And so Zhu just kept on running as fast as he could, and he finally saw his bus parked up against the curb on the outside of this bus station, and he ran up to it, totally winded, but glad that he hadn't missed his bus. And so the driver noticed Zhu standing there, and so he opened up the bus doors, and Zhu went on board, handed the driver his ticket, and the driver said, okay, take your seat, and Zhu turned, and he began walking down the aisle, and at first, he almost didn't register the weirdness of the inside of this bus. I mean, he took this route all the time, and he was totally expecting this bus to be packed, but as he was walking down the aisle, he realized he was the only one on the bus. There was literally nobody else. It was just Zhu and the driver. And so for a second, Zhu thought maybe he had made a mistake and this was not his bus, but he checked his watch and, again, he had taken this bus many times and he knew this was it. And so he was about to turn and maybe ask the bus driver, but the bus driver shut the doors, turned on the engine, and began to pull away. And so Zhu just thought, well, I guess it's just my lucky day. I have the bus to myself. This is crazy. And so Zhu found a seat towards the front of the bus, and after sitting down and kind of getting situated, he just sat there and stared out the window as the driver, merged into traffic and eventually found their way onto the highway. And as they were just coasting along, Zhu really felt content. I mean, it really felt like he had this private ride all to himself, and this was not a short bus ride. It was like a 6-hour bus ride. And so the idea of just having peace and calm the whole time, I mean, that was so luxurious and unexpected. And so Zhu was just having a wonderful time, just kind of taking it all in, when all of a sudden he hears a woman coughing behind him, and remember, he's scanned the bus. It's empty. And so he whipped his head around, totally startled, like maybe there was somebody on the bus, but he looked behind him and there was no one. And so very quickly, Zhu began to rationalize what he had just heard. He's looking around thinking, okay, one of the windows is slightly open. Maybe the wind was coming in weird and causing a sound, or maybe it wasn't behind me. Maybe that cough came from the driver and somehow I thought it was back here. Zhu's telling himself that wasn't really a woman coughing because there's nobody here. And so before long, Zhu convinced himself that, that was just an anomaly. It was nothing to worry about. And he was back there just relaxing and enjoying this peaceful ride. And pretty soon after that, he began to drift off to sleep. A few hours later, Zhu woke up and he was very groggy and he looked out the window and saw it was dark and he checked his watch and saw they were maybe about halfway to their destination. And then he looked at his phone and saw he had a text message from the friend he had just been visiting, the friend he had been with before he left and got on this bus. And the friend was basically asking Zhu how the ride home was going. And Zhu, he wrote back and said, you won't believe this. I'm on a bus that's completely empty. Like I have the bus to myself. And this friend, who was familiar with how packed this particular ride to Taipei was like, no way, that bus is never not filled with people. You gotta send me proof. And so Zhu opened the camera on his phone, he turned around, and he snapped a photo of the back of the bus. But when he looked at the photo he had taken, it was very grainy, and there wasn't any light in the bus, and there wasn't a flash on his phone. And so instead, Zhu, who happened to be a semi-professional photographer, he pulled out his really nice high-quality digital camera out of his bag, and with that camera, he turned around and took a photo. But when Zhu looked at the photo he had just taken, he thought there was something wrong with it. And so he zoomed in on the photo and he couldn't believe what he was looking at. And so he checked all the settings of his camera and checked the lens to make sure everything was working properly, and it was. And so starting to get kind of scared, Zhu put the camera down and walked to the back of the bus and walked up and down a couple of times looking for some explanation of what was in that photo. But there was no explanation, and so now feeling really scared, Zhu went back to his seat, grabbed his phone to text his friend to be like, look what I found, but his phone was dead. Even though his phone had full battery like a minute ago, now his phone doesn't work and he can't turn it back on. And so Zhu's thinking, what do? Do I tell the bus driver about this photo? But he was worried if he showed the driver, it would be so startling that the driver might crash the bus. And so Zhu really felt completely alone and terrified, and he just placed his camera next to him and then just closed his eyes and began silently praying that he would get off this bus. But as he was doing that, he began to hear whispering right behind him, like numerous people whispering right behind him, and he whipped his head around, but again, there's nobody there. And so now, the fear is only getting more and more heightened inside of Zhu. He goes back to praying, and now, in addition to the whispers behind him, he starts to hear the sound of seats basically creaking as if somebody's sitting in them, kind of rocking back and forth. And now Zhu, he's too scared to turn around, and so he just keeps on praying, and the noise behind him, this cacophony of sounds, is getting louder and louder. And finally, Zhu looks up at the driver, hoping the driver can hear the stuff, to confirm that Zhu's not losing his mind here. But the driver looked like he was just
paying attention to the road, completely oblivious to what was happening inside of this bus. And so Zhu is horrified, has no idea what to do. These noises are not stopping, despite the fact nobody else is on this bus. And so Zhu finally plugged his ears just so he wouldn't hear it, and just tucked himself down in a ball and just continued to pray for the next 3 hours, all the way until the bus finally stopped. And when the bus stopped, Zhu unplugged his ears and opened his eyes, expecting to hear all these whispers and sounds, but the bus sounded totally quiet and normal. And the bus driver, was kind of going through the shutdown procedures of the bus. They were in the Taipei bus station. And so Zhu was feeling totally relieved here, and he couldn't wait to get off this bus. And so Zhu, he grabbed his camera and his things, packed them all up, and then as quick as he could, he began walking towards the front of the bus. But before Zhu got off the bus, the driver stopped him because he saw, Zhu looked horrible. He was sweating profusely. His skin was flushed. He looked like, something bad had just happened to him. And he asked Zhu, like, hey, are you okay? And Zhu was about to be like, oh, no, everything's fine, and just kind of get off the bus. But then he thought to himself, I have no explanation for what just happened, and that was horrifying. I don't know what that was. And I took this photo that I can't explain too, that seems definitely connected to all the noises I just heard. And now that the bus has stopped, there's no risk of showing the driver and risking scaring him so badly that we crash. And so Zhu thought, you know what, even if it makes me look crazy, I'm going to show the driver this photo and see what he thinks. And so Zhu was like, actually, let me show you something. So he pulls out his camera and he shows the driver the photo. And as the driver is kind of looking at the photo, not really sure what to look for, Zhu, he reaches down and he zooms in on the top half of the photo, and it expands the ceiling of the back of the bus. And you can very clearly see there is a huge human arm and hand extending off the ceiling, like it's reaching down into the bus. And so as the bus driver is studying this arm and hand, Zhu is saying, I thought for a second that could have been me, reflected off the ceiling or something, but I was holding the camera in my hand, and so wouldn't the camera be in the reflection? If that's my arm, wouldn't the camera be visible? Because it's not. And then Zhu also was like, I thought for a second maybe it was your arm, but you're driving the bus. Your hands are on the steering wheel. And so if this arm is your hand, wouldn't the steering wheel be in the reflection? Like, I don't understand how there's an arm with nothing in the hand reaching down from the ceiling. And then Zhu also told the driver that in addition to this totally terrifying photo of this ghost arm coming off the ceiling, there were all these weird whispers and sounds and noises behind him for the whole ride. Like, it was horrifying. And so after Zhu has detailed to this bus driver that basically your bus is haunted and I have photo proof, Zhu is expecting the driver to have a pretty big reaction to this. I mean, geez, this is pretty big news here. But the driver just handed the camera back to Zhu and basically turned to Zhu and said, you know what? You can't show this photo to anybody. Like, no one can know about what happens on my bus, because if they find out, it'll ruin my business. And Zhu's thinking, wait a minute, does this mean the bus is haunted? Is that what the bus driver is confirming here? He doesn't seem shocked. He seems like this is completely routine. This is what happens on his bus. And Zhu was about to protest and be like, are you kidding me? Like, why aren't you telling people about what's happening on your bus? But then Zhu was like, you know what? I don't know this guy. I don't care about this bus. You know what? I'm done with this. And so he said to the driver, don't worry, I won't tell anyone about, your haunted bus. I won't show anyone this photo. Thank you. And then Zhu got off the bus. When Zhu finally got to his house, it was around midnight and Zhu was exhausted. So he goes inside, he lays on his couch and he plugs his phone in because his phone was dead. And as soon as his phone turned on, he saw all these messages from his friend who had asked him to send proof that the bus he was on was really empty. And so Zhu wanted to tell his friend about all the crazy stuff that had happened on the bus. He wanted to send him that photo of, the ghost arm. But also Zhu had promised the bus driver not to share this information with anyone because it could destroy this guy's business. And so as he was sitting there kind of wondering how to respond, something caught Zhu's attention outside. And so he turned and looked out the window and he saw all these people walking down the road carrying red lanterns. And suddenly, everything sort of clicked for Zhu. It was September 5th, which is important because it marked the beginning of a big event in Taiwan known as the Hungry Ghost Festival, and the people Zhu saw outside walking around with red lanterns were clearly participating in this event. This festival is celebrated every year in Taiwan, and it's all about honoring the dead and feeding them with offerings. For example, people will burn fake money they call ghost money, and once it gets burned, the spirits of the dead can use that money during the ghost month. People in Taiwan believe that during this ghost month, the gates of heaven and hell open up, and spirits come out and walk the earth alongside all the living, which could be a great thing. If you have a dead loved one or friend or somebody, you can reconnect with them during this event, but it also can be a bad thing because sometimes angry spirits emerge from the gates of hell and they wreak havoc on the living. And so as soon as Zhu realized that, today was the start of this Hungry Ghost Festival, he realized why the day before when he was on that bus, he realized why it was empty. Because there's this superstition in Taiwan that September 4th, the day before this festival, is the day when all the spirits are traveling around the globe. And it's believed that that day is a very dangerous day for the living to be out and about, because you don't want to come in contact by accident with, one of the evil spirits. And so nobody travels on September 4th. But Zhu had just forgotten and just believed he had struck luck by having this empty bus. But then, as Zhu was kind of working this through in his mind, he was thinking, wait a minute, all that weird stuff on the bus, the whispers, the sounds, the ghost arm reaching out of the ceiling that he got on camera, was that some sign that he had just come in contact with an evil spirit? Was he now in danger? Was this spirit gonna follow him around and haunt him? He didn't know, but now he's thinking, oh my goodness, I did the thing I wasn't supposed to do, and now I could be paying the consequences for it. And so Zhu suddenly was like, you know what? I don't care that I made some promise to the bus driver about not disclosing this photo or what I experienced on the bus, because now this is like a me problem. I could have big issues here. And so he decided he would send this photo to his friend and tell his friend about what he experienced on the bus to see what his friend thought. And so after messaging his friend wrote back that he was horrified by that photo, seeing that arm reaching down out of the ceiling, that was horrifying. And his friend didn't know what to make of it and did agree that, given the fact that the Hungry Ghost Festival has just started and you were out there on the day before, this isn't good. You could have come in contact with an evil spirit here. But his friend also gave Zhu some advice of how to handle this. He told Zhu to take that photo and post it on Facebook. Now that sounds kind of goofy, but in Taiwan, there's this belief that if you have bad luck, the best way to deal with bad luck is to basically dilute that bad luck by sharing it with other people. It's kind of like those old email forwards that people used to pass around, like, hey, forward this email along to 5 other people or else you'll have bad luck. It was kind of like that. Just share it with the world and, pass on your bad luck to other people, basically. And so Zhu's friend told Zhu, look, I know this isn't really bad luck we're dealing with here, but maybe if you just share this with the world, dilute what happened to you, maybe that will reduce the power this ghost has over you. It's worth a shot. And so Zhu posted the photo to Facebook, and it pretty much immediately went viral. Millions of people saw it, and this is what Zhu wanted. He wanted, max dilution here, show it to everybody to reduce the chances that this, entity can hurt him. But after all these people saw it, lots of people were spooked, and they began messaging Zhu, not like, don't worry, it's diluted now, but instead they were like, hey man, you're in trouble. This thing's gonna come after you. You need to seek real help here. You're in danger. And so this ended up freaking out Zhu more than the photo did in some way. It just made the whole situation feel far more real. And so Zhu ended up deleting the photo on Facebook, setting his Facebook to private, and basically staying off social media. And then he just kind of hoped and prayed that if he did nothing and just stayed home and kind of minded his own business, that he'd be okay. And after a few days, when nothing did happen, ultimately he just told himself, I'm okay. There's no ghosts here. I'm fine. But exactly 1 week after Zhu had got off the bus, so September 11th, 2017, Zhu is in his house, he's laying on the couch, not really thinking about what had happened on the bus, and as he's scrolling social media, he comes across this headline about this horrible accident out on the highway not far from where he lived. And it was this one vehicle that got into this huge wreck, and 6 people were killed and 11 others were injured. I mean, it's this horrible, horrible accident. And as Zhu is reading the article and scrolling down, he comes across a photo of the driver of this vehicle who's covered head to toe in blood. He looks totally haggard. He's standing out on this dark highway. And Zhu realizes the driver of the vehicle was the bus driver from when he had that horrible experience on the bus. It's the same guy. And so Zhu's like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? He scrolls down and he realizes the vehicle that crashed was the exact same bus he had been riding in when all this stuff happened. It was the same bus driver, same bus on the exact same route that this accident happened. And so obviously this is like a horrifying coincidence. Zhu very likely was thinking, I'm so lucky this didn't happen when I was on the bus. But when you take into context what Zhu experienced on that bus just a week earlier, the photo, the sounds, all of it, this story gets even weirder. Because the official story is the driver was negligent, and that's what caused the crash. That's it. And he actually went to jail for negligence. But there's video footage taken from inside of the bus right before it crashed, and in the final 30 seconds, something strange happens. The driver does not seem distracted at all, he's just driving along, but then something catches his attention, something off to his side. And you can tell right away he notices whatever this thing is, and he's turning, he's looking at this thing, he's not really paying attention to the road, and he starts reaching down. He's interacting with something in the bus, and you can't see it on camera. And as he gets more and more into dealing with whatever's happening over here, the bus crashes. Now, the driver never gave any public testimony about what was going on right before he crashed. All we have is the fact that it crashed, and this video footage, and Zhu's experience and that photo he took. And when you put it all together, it really makes you wonder if there was any truth to there really being some evil spirit on that bus that maybe did cause this crash. Or is it just a series of unexplainable coincidences? You be the judge.
Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya.